We're good? We're starting? Why not? Welcome. How are you this morning?
Morning.
FNA. Awesome. Cool. My name is Owen Leach. I am the co-founder and developer. What's up? Oh, I need to be in the webcam. I am the co-founder and developer here at Bomb Shelter Games. Developer is a catch-all for designer, programmer, producer, everything but art.
And as you may have guessed, I'm Bennett Tyler, one of the other co-founders, and art doesn't create an umbrella term. I just do the art.
He just
all of it, but just the art.
So who this talk is for, I guess, is for college students, which is great. Because way back when we were young and skinny and pretty, we started Bomb Shelter Games. Just to give you an idea of how long ago that was, I'm wearing silly bands in that picture. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Oh my God.
That's how long ago that was. 10
years.
10 years. So we started our game studio in college, and we're going to talk about how we grew it, sort of the things that we did right, things that we did wrong, and where we've gone from there. So where have we gone from there, Bennett?
We've gone a couple of different places. So the first game that we tried to put together was Till Death. You can actually see some, you might be able to see some faint artwork on the walls that we did trying to put this game together. Didn't quite pan out, but we're going to get into that. We've put together a couple of mobile games, John Q. Average Man being our first mobile game and our first truly released title as Bomb Shelter Games. Our next title actually got through the Steam Greenlight process. That was back before Greenlight got scrapped, and they just sort of opened the floodgates to really anything and anybody who had $100 to get on Steam nowadays.
Yeah, now it's $100.
And then from there we have another mobile game that we put together, Ball Bounce Blast. So as you can see, we do a little bit of mobile, a little bit of full PC, and our latest game, if you're familiar with BFIG, you may have heard of. It's Depths of Sanity. It is a Metroidvania underwater exploration game, and as I mentioned, we got compelling game mechanics at the most recent BFIG Fest for it, and has been our most successful game to date. It is not out yet, but we have a lot of opportunities that it has opened it up for us. We're going out to South by Southwest in March. We'll be at PAX Rising again for the second year in a row in March as well.
Yeah, we're taking pre-sales after the talk.
Yeah, exactly. And it's our first game that's going to consoles. We're going to be on Xbox and PlayStation 4. So the reason we just kind of threw a lot of this stuff at you all in one sequence is to kind of show you that like the first game on here, Till Death, never even came out. And we took that and basically we're going to run you through how we turned Till Death, a failed project that never saw the light of day, and turned it into an award-winning game that's going to be on consoles. And we're going to run through that process.
So just sort of the steps that we're going to talk about is finding which game that you should make for your first game. Should you start in a studio? Then how do you build your team out? How do you build that physical game? How do you publish that game? And where do we go from here after today's talk? So maybe you want to make games, maybe you're studying games, maybe you're not, maybe you're doing a degree in something else, but we all want to make a game. And that's not uncommon, right? There's like a million people out there who also want to make video games. That's why it's so competitive. Does anybody have an idea that they're working on? Want to share? Huh? Come on, my students are in the crowd. What are you making?
We got Birch Tree.
What is it?
We got Super Burning Wood.
Super Burning Wood.
It's out right now on Android and iOS.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So, the hard truth.
It's too late. You should have ordered it.
It's already out. Oh my God. I sang here. I'm joking. I'm saying I didn't know what he was going to say. I didn't set him up. But this is just sort of a mantra for you to have when you come up with your game ideas. Because you sort of want to recite it to yourself. Nobody cares about your game. And that's like a hard thing to swallow. So you have to be your biggest advocate, always convincing other people that your idea is worthwhile. Going out to every single event, sharing it, workshopping it, just keep coming back. My idea sucks. How do I make it better? How do I make it better? How do I make it better? And the second thing is an idea. You mentioned a product, which is great. An idea is worthless, right? Everybody can come up with ideas. But until you actually make something, until you ship a game, it's just words on paper, right? So you have to get beyond that and actually create something. That's what this whole process is about. And we want to look at like what makes a good idea, a marketable idea. So yeah, I want to make the next Skyrim. That's just not going to happen. Like, it's just not. And that sucks, and that's what it is. But if you want to actually form an indie studio, you have to have clear expectations of what is a marketable idea. Okay? So who is making your game? What are the skill sets that they have? Oh, we're going to make Skyrim, but none of us have 3D models. Oh, yeah, we'll pick it up. No, you won't, right? It'll take years and years to do that. And if this is a business that you rely on, you have to keep that in mind, right? So why are you making this game specifically? Who is going to talk about this game specifically? Why is the press going to talk about this game? I'm making a Mario clone. Cool. Is IGN going to write about that? No, right? It's just another in a pile of millions of games behind it. So we need to come up with interesting, engaging ideas that, believe it or not, are not truly revolutionary. People don't receive revolutionary ideas well. You could list off the revolutionary games that have come out and changed the industry. Minecraft, yeah, cool, right? That totally created this new industry. But for every million games, there's one that breaks the mold. Most people want their expression is tried and true with a twist, right? Something that I can look at, I can understand, I know how it plays, but it's slightly different than other games that I've played like it, right? And another thing is, if your idea is like, oh, it'd be really cool if we did this, and it's an idea that you just like personally, you have one guaranteed sale, right? That's you. And unless you buy the game for $10 million or something like that, it's not a profitable idea. So we need to get feedback. We're going to talk more about that. But where we want to start with this is about scope. And that comes in at the idea phase, right? Did you want to talk about scope?
No, I'll touch on that.
Okay, cool. So if this is your first game, right, and you've never made something to completion, there are just a million different things that you are not thinking of that have to go into the production of a game that really, really, I don't know, makes the game much larger than you think it is. Oh, I can mock up a Mario mechanic in 2 weeks, right? Cool, good for you. But have you thought about saving? Have you thought about what happens when the controller gets unplugged? Have you thought about the GUI sound effects? What happens when you disconnect from the internet? Whatever, right? There's just a million different bugs that go into that oftentimes at the idea level you don't think of. So you really want to plan for that when you come up with this idea. And we're going to talk about what makes a very good first game for your indie studio, your baby, and it's an indie studio, and like what will work with that. So
Yeah, we talked a lot about what not to put in your first game, obviously. So now we're going to talk about, well, what should it look like? And this goes hand in hand with what Owen was saying. It's not about making a game that everybody's going to play and love, and that you're going to be selling 1 million copies for. This is your first game. It's practice. It's learning, and that's what you should treat it as. It's going to be simple, it's going to be basic, and you're just going to make one, ship it out, make another one, ship it out. It's not about monetization. It's about learning what your team is, who can do what, whose strengths are where, and just really getting into the nitty-gritty of making those games, finding out what things are going to trip you up this time that you can preempt and make sure you avoid next time. Is going to be some of the most important information that you learn. So how do you get it? How do you get your game down to a point where you can actually make it? And first and foremost, this is going back to scope, is just strip away everything. If you have more than one mechanic for your first game, you've probably got a problem. Strip it down, one mechanic, make it simple, but make it sing is a good way to think about it. Just really take that one mechanic and stretch it as far as it can go. Keep yourself in that sort of constrained space around that single mechanic and polish it until you have something that's interesting and compelling. Next time you make a game, you've got a mechanic. You can add to it, and you've got the experience of working around and polishing a single mechanic, and you can work up from there.
Right, if you prove your worth while having the simplest possible game ever, right? How many mechanics are in the lamp log game?
Super burning.
Super burning wood, thank you.
All you do is you can just move your fire on the screen with your finger on the phone. You burn wood, dodge water.
Bam! There you go, right?
Fire go out.
And did you finish? You finished. It went to market,
I
right?
did in Global Game Jam, just 48 hours.
Perfect, right? Awesome. So we're going to take a look at our first 2 games that we tried to make, and I want you to tell me which do you think came out and which do you think did not come out. I think Bennett already spoiled.
Yeah,
but that's okay.
Yeah. Forget what I said at the beginning of it.
Right. So when we first, innocent, didn't know anything game developers. In fact, none of us even studied game development, so we were kind of screwed. We said, oh, let's make a zombie game because zombies.
It's that sort of quintessential scenario of a bunch of kids who play video games sitting down and being like, you know what? Let's make a video game. It'd be cool if we if we did this, and like we had a zombie game where like you weren't fighting zombies, that wasn't the thing. You were gonna you had to like stealth around the zombies, and the environment is how you would take down zombies, but it was like mostly about avoidance.
Yeah.
And like you could do all this cool stuff, like pick up these things and like almost any sort of item, and they'd interact with the environment in different ways. And we had all these, like we spec'd out all these characters and wrote out the storylines and all these plot threads and got geared up to make all of these plans. We spent like maybe a year and a half putting this together. Was it actually? Did we actually ever even have something that was like playable?
A trailer.
Right. That wasn't my question.
I'm going to talk about this in a later talk, but the trailer got me into grad school, so it wasn't all worth that. It wasn't all worth it. Anyway, Till Death. It's a 2D zombie platformer, right? You could walk, jump, climb ledges. There's zombies who could bite and scratch you. There's environmental puzzles. 15 voice-acted NPCs on zero budget, for the record. 5 acts, 3 levels per act. Cutscenes, and it's for PC and made with an engine you've never even heard of. I don't have to tell you this game did not come out, right?
Even though I have twice.
There's just no way this game was going to be successful. It's scoped so poorly. It's made just for us because we thought it would be fun. And it was dead on arrival, right? If someone pitched that idea, I'd just tell them to stop, right? So our actual first game that did ship is John Q. Average Man. And just to compare the complexity of this game versus the other one, he can jump and walk.
He can't even jump infinitely. He can only jump a limited amount of times.
If he jumps too many times, he has a heart attack and dies. And that's it. That was it. He's trying to get to his beer. He's a construction worker.
2 cutscenes. One to open the game,
Yep.
one when you beat a level.
Yeah, and that was it.
That's
right?
it.
And then, since it was such a simple mechanic, right, walk and jump, any idiot can program that, myself being an idiot programmer. But we could just stretch that, and each level would be interesting and different, where this level has moving platforms, this has platforms that fall, this one has lighting, just really, really simple things.
From an art standpoint, it was also incredibly scalable. We basically had 2 backgrounds and objects for him to stand on. And from there, the world is your oyster. You can mix and match those in any way you see fit. And you don't have to worry about drawing a new level for each one of these 80 levels. They all recycle the same simple, like 4 or 5 assets.
Yeah.
It was all about stripping it down, simplicity. A lot of, actually, the character animation for John was pulled from, we basically kind of just Frankenstein monstered portions of this game out of the corpse of depths of Till Death.
Yeah.
That's right. To put it together. So it was on multiple angles, keeping it as simple as possible just to get something finished, to get through the entire process.
So now that you made your first game, you made Log Fire Game, whatever that was called. Now, ideally, you would make more and more and more, right? Till you've made a fair amount of games that allows you. There is one more, even more than I thought, because that's going to allow you to practice and get better and better and develop more advanced mechanics beyond just walking and jumping or beyond dragging logs across the screen. And on top of that, it's going to allow you to build a fan base. It's going to build a following. If you release a game into a vacuum, remember, your idea is terrible. Who is going to talk about it? You don't have a fan base to advocate for you. So those few starter games might allow you to build that fan base, get that Twitter follower thing going, Instagram, whatever. Now comes time for the moneymaker. I now want to go full-time, and I want to make a game that will potentially be profitable, that maybe allows me to work on indie games full-time. So I figured we'd take a look at some of the successful indie games that we've seen and see if we can't find some common threads in them. Okay. So if we look at all these different ones, Brave, Fez, Super Meat Boy, we might notice that there are certain recurring mechanics in them. And they sort of come down to these, right? I'll go back to the slide before to help you remember that. But most of these games do not have networking or multiplayer in them. Okay? As I was talking to a professional at Shell Games in Pittsburgh, and they said if we add networking, we quadruple the cost of the game. Is how they estimate that, right? So we avoid that altogether. You generally, on indie games, you are on a very tight budget, so we want to avoid any sort of excess costs. Okay? None of these games have RPG elements to them, or if they do, they're very, very simple. Because RPG elements, there's so much back-end mathematics in that, systems designs go into that, that will bog you down. Alternatively, you could make an RPG Maker game, but nobody likes those games. No offense to the moon, which is an RPG Maker game. They're a single purchase, and maybe they do DLC later. But there's not a lot of microtransactions in these games. We don't see mobile games being super highly successful in the indie game space because it takes a lot of money to get the user base to make those profitable. Also takes a lot of know-how to make microtransactions work, but actually we're going to talk about that later, right? Most of these games have a single mechanic that is repeated over and over and over again, but slightly varied, right? Look at Super Meat Boy, look at Braid, look at Fez. They're all, at their core, it's just this one interesting thing that you do. Reverse time or jump in Super Meat Boy, I guess. Turn the world in Fez, or VVV, just move gravity up and down. And they just iterate on that again and again and again, so they're making the most out of something very, very small. They're super tight, super polished, right? We perceive the quality in games through their, how are they bug-free? Are the art aesthetics pleasing, right? And then most of these started on PC and then were ported later to other platforms, because you're making it on PC is the easiest thing to get out there. If the PC build is successful, that funds your later development. And it is not just these games. We can see this proves true for most indie games, even today, right? Look at Celeste. What's the mechanic in Celeste? Jump dash, again. Jump again, right? Yeah. Like, that's it. And then they iterate on it 100 different times to make an interesting experience. Okay. So I was saying, why do we not do mobile? It's a hard space to enter, right? Do I have the number up there? Yeah. There are 2.5 million apps on the App Store right now, 800,000 of which are games, right? And there are 811,000, actually, that's how many total games are up there, right?
Yes, 800.
Perfect. So there's about 10,000 apps added every single month. So you could break down the math on that. I'm not going to. How many come out a day, right? How do you stand out in that sea of apps that comes out? It's very, very difficult, right? If you go the premium purchase route, maybe you charge $1. I mean, when's the last time you bought a phone?
I mean, I'm not a good example of that.
Okay, right? Profit margin, let's say you sell for 99 cents. Apple's going to take 30 of that. And then when you buy it, people don't anticipate microtransactions in that. Microtransactions are difficult to design for if you're not experienced with them, so that's pretty hard as well. So just as an anecdote, we made more in 1 week of Ballistics pre-sales than we did for the entire 4-year lifespan of John Q. Average Man. It's just amazing the difference that made.
But this does go back to the idea we were talking about earlier. Mobile's a great practice space. It gets you acquainted with getting a game finished and put out on a platform. These games aren't going to make you money, but they are going to give you experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing we want to talk about is how to build your team. All right, we've all worked in group projects maybe, and you realize that I cannot trust people, and they're going to screw me, right? So how do you build a team that you can trust?
Yeah. It is a bit easier said than done, but the problem is you are going to have to figure out how to do this, because we all hear these stories about, Jonathan Blow, or like the creator of
Stardew Valley.
Right, yeah, these guys who are these like one-man armies who can code apparently like geniuses and also like do art no problem, and like somehow they're few and far between. Don't expect to be like the Tom Brady of indie games. Like, that's just not what's gonna happen. You need to be realistic, and you're gonna need help.
Yeah, like we can list on our hand the number of one-man people who make an awesome game, right?
Exactly.
It's very rare.
And the advice that we're going to, mileage is going to vary. You're going to need a different size team depending on what you're trying to accomplish. We're going to get into some of our team sizes in a bit for some of the games we had to ship. You're looking at the majority of the Bomb Shelter Games team right now. We do have a couple other people who pinch hit. They help out for certain. They help out certain amounts for certain games depending on different things. So you can find people, either people you know, people at community events like this, or you could be hiring people as contractors, and we're going to kind of get into some of that. The bottom line, though, is if you're going to work in the game industry at all, you're going to need to learn how to work with people, either on your own individual indie studios, or if you go into the job market at a AAA studio, you're going to need to learn how to work with people. So how do you fill that team up with people? Well, first and foremost, you have to think about what you can do, what your skill sets are. I can do art, and that's about it. And you got to find people who are either around you and enable you, friends you know, or other people within the indie community who can help you fill those gaps. Owen can develop. That's sort of how that team works. Trust between those people, though, is key. for Bomb Shelter Games, especially early on, but still to this day, a lot of the work that we're doing is out of pocket. We're not pulling in enough money to pay a bunch of employees, so we have a bunch of people who we've been working together on Bomb Shelter Games for 10 years. We've known each other longer, so trust is a huge part of how we get things done, and that will be instrumental for you and your team. Early on, this is no longer the case, but early on, we did not work remote. We met twice a week.
Twice a week?
Twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. We met physically in the same room. We sat down, we worked together. We treated this like work, no fooling around. Well, maybe we'll just get a quick round of something in before we jump into it. We treated it like work. We got together and we worked on the game. These days, we are able to succeed remotely, but it's because we've
established the trust,
right? Ingrained that work ethic through 10 years of working together and doing this. Networking, events like this, indie meetups, playcrafting, BFIG, all of these are great places to meet like-minded people who are looking to make games and do this with you. Granted, you're going to run into people who just kind of, going back to your idea is terrible, you're going to run into people with those terrible ideas. I've got this great idea, get started. Watch out for those people. We're not saying that everybody with a story design idea or everybody who's an audio person is going to cause a problem, but be careful of the people who want you to make their game and don't want to help you make a game with them. There's a distinct difference.
And sort of the key there is profit sharing. When I was working in the industry, we had a 80-person studio and we had a single full-time audio professional, right? So if someone audio comes in and thinks they're going to split 50-50 with you, your game's profits are 25, 25, 25, 25. It's just the amount of work, forget about it, that goes into programming compared to how much goes into audio is just not comparable. So just be really, really careful. Just because they are part of your team does not give them an equal share in the profits that you make. So same thing with the story man or story woman. There's no such thing as sitting on your ass and thinking of stuff. You have to be involved in the game in some way. So don't, pay them as contractors if you need to, but don't give up your share in a company because you don't want to hurt their feelings or something.
And there are resources in like this that you're currently checking out, but there are also places online that you can check out as well to meet some of these like-minded people. We've got some listed up there. So you've got your team, and now what do? Well, for your first game, we're still talking about those mobile games, those small games, and this is great for sort of stress testing your team. Putting them all together and putting that game together, making sure that people have responsibilities and they're fulfilling those responsibilities so you can get a sense of who will do how much will they do, you get that level of trust. The important thing here though is that trust is not fully established yet. So when you're assigning these things out, when you're making these plans, have backup plans. The bus test. If one of your team gets hit by a bus, is your game dead in the water? For your first game, you're going to want to make sure that that's not the case. Not saying that your team is going to get hit by a bus, but in the more realistic scenario, the team might fall apart. You might find somebody who's super passionate about building this game today, and in a month, something changes and they really can't do it anymore. You've got to be ready for these changes in your team for this first game. Things can get a little bit messy, so keep it small, keep it simple, and keep some backup plans. When you move on to your next game, now that you've worked with this team, you know what your skills are, you know who you can trust with what, now you can start sinking your teeth into something a little bit meatier, something a bit bigger, and something a little bit more marketable.
So our team, of course, just tracking how it has changed through the years. We started with Till Death with 5 people working on it. A designer, an artist, an audio person, a programmer, and a composer. None of which were secondary roles. We all met every single week, twice a week, about 12 hours each week. And I was that useless person. I was the person who just sat there and wrote stuff down. And guess what? That game didn't get made, right? Because I wasn't contributing to it. And we found out that we could not trust certain people.
It is worth noting here, too, that size is not necessarily your deciding factor. Till Death was our biggest team, and it's also our biggest flop. Right. Experience was one of the biggest things that we were lacking in that 5, but it isn't about numbers. It is about trust. It is about skill gaps.
Right. Right? And as we sort of progressed, what we learned is that your team should be flexible. For one project, you might need full-time work in audio, and the other one you might not. You might need more programmers on one than the other. And since we built those relationships over time, we know who we can come back to, who can rely on to get that work done, and who we should just keep as contractors to just do the thing we asked for specifically and not rely on them for anything else. So we also wanted to talk a little bit about how to finance. When you start your game studio, presumably you have no money. I mean, ideally you have someone who has invested in you, some idiot you conned into giving you money, but that's pretty uncommon, right? Because who's going to lend you money when you have no experience? I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Right? So that means you have basically one decision to make. You're going to bootstrap your game, right? And how we did it was we all threw in some money to start, like $200. We bought things that we needed: a tablet, a whiteboard, some licenses, and then every meeting we'd all throw in $1, and then we'd accrue money. So each meeting, what's $1 every week, right, or $2 each week. I also went around my college campus and I literally begged for change. I had a little bucket that was like, hey, do I have a quote there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I do. Hey there, can you spare any change for Owen's game so I can
be developed so Owen can pursue his dream. He would do it for you. Love Owen's game.
And people would put money in that. It was like, are you kidding me?
Right?
Right? People would put money in that, and I was like, oh, this is awesome, right?
The most important thing and the biggest thing about financing is clearly, I mean, this is just one way. This is not necessarily anywhere near the best way to do this. There are multiple ways to either get financing for your games or not finance your games, operate on like a very small shoestring budget. The bottom line is, if you're going to try to take a hobby or a passion for game development and turn it into a company, it's gonna cost money. You can't start a company without some sort of upfront cost, and initially it's probably gonna come out of your pocket. And it's just something to be aware of as you get started. There are ways around it, longer development times, and working with friends is a great way to keep your budget as small as possible. We've been doing this for 10 years and our budget has been very, very small the entire time, but it takes us about 3 to 4 years to put a game together because of that.
Your traditional funding methods of doing contract work or something like that, if you have no back portfolio to pull from, they're not going to hire you to do it, right? Crowdfunding, you don't have 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people's emails. Your crowdfunding is not going to succeed, right? So you don't have that following, so you got to find some way to get at least a little seed money to get you to expos, to conventions, to show off your game, just really small stuff that you need for little costs to come up. But once you've shipped that game and you start pulling in the money, all of our stuff is funded by the profits from our previous titles now. It just took us a while to get that started.
So, you figured out what game you're going to make. You figured out who you're going to make it with. So now, how do you actually get started and keep yourself actually producing so you get something to the end? Because it's one thing to come up with the idea. It's one thing to put together the team. It's a whole different ballgame to actually take that team and actually put the game together.
Right. So creating a game that actually ships is really, really different than making a functioning prototype, right? Just because you made a game in a class sometime does not mean you shipped a game. There's so many more things like approval process and getting all the signing your apps and all the stupid stuff you never even think of that goes into it. So we need to actually think about how we approach our development rather than just being like, oh, I'm going to make stuff, right? And we'll see how it goes. So let's just, as an example, I created myself a nice little timeline. I said I'm going to start my game today and I'm going to ship it a year from now. Think I'm gonna get that done? No. What the time? That's not a timeline. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll figure it out eventually. And I'm sure when September 12th hit in 2017, I'd be like, oh shit, I need another year, right? And a lot of people approach game development with sort of dated, antiquated idea of a waterfall approach. If I'm gonna do one thing, then the other, then the other, then the other. And that's not really how we approach game development. Okay. What happens when you approach what happens when you use waterfall development without actually getting player feedback in it is you end up at a goal, and your goal might be the goal that you wanted when you started, but it might not be the product that people want to buy, right? So I have a vision, I design my game, I make the game that I designed, but if I do not take into account player feedback and adapt my design based on what they say, I'm going to end up with the game that I wanted, but not the game that people are going to buy. So a good example of that came from Ballistic. And someone who
It's the
remained
game
unnamed
that I wanted.
came up with some interesting features where
It's the coolest concept in the world if you ask only me.
Yes.
And when we asked everybody else, it was kind of novel and kind of cute, but it turns out not something that you build a game around.
Right, so for context, Bennett, I'll name him now, thought it would be a good idea that you had to cock the shotgun by hand and to load every shell by hand, and that's a fun idea. But it turns out
that it is
people hate that
fun
crap.
idea, but yes.
Right? And we found that out, I guess, a little too late for my taste. And
Mine as well.
Yeah. And what happened was this, right? We had an idea in mind. We hit milestones. We kept going towards that idea, but we didn't take into account the user, right? We didn't get their feedback. So instead of adapting like this, right? This is something referred to as agile development. You release a test build or whatever it is at the end of each milestone, at the end of each sprint. I can go into what that all means, but at the end of that, somebody plays your game. They give you feedback. You change your game based on their feedback. This is iterative design. Okay? Now that I'm listening to my user and making my game better based on their feedback, I'm actually going to get a product that people want to buy rather than just Bennett.
Exactly. So, the question is, how do you figure that out? Because clearly, and we kind of touched on this, we figured that out with Ballistic way too late. So, what happened? And the problem is, you don't know what doesn't work in your game. You're too close to it, you've been playing it too long. Ballistic was being developed for 2 years behind closed doors, and we were 2 years into development before we figured out that the core mechanic behind our gameplay wasn't as fun as we thought it was, and was a lot more cumbersome than we thought it was, because we were way too close to see the flaws. We had already started ignoring these small little things that no player who has a wealth of games at their disposal is going to ignore. So you need people to play it. And I'm not talking about your mom. I don't mean that she can't play video games. She may very well be able to, but she's not going to tell you what's wrong with your game. She loves you very much, and she's just not going to break your heart like that. And you need to find people who will. The good thing is, the internet, as well as the world in general, is full of people who don't love you and will tell you how bad your game is.
Yeah, we don't love you. We'll tell you. We'll tell you your game sucks.
The question is, how do you find them? Because we've told you time and time again that most people might not be interested in. So you got to make them interested in it. So now we're going to talk about, you've got the game, you've put it together, and you're ready to take it to market. How do you do that? The bad news is there is no magic bullet. If there was, we wouldn't be here. We would be super successful, well-advertised game developers because there's a magic bullet for marketing. There really isn't one. We're going to touch on some ideas that have worked well for us. We're going to touch on some ideas that we do believe are must-haves, but you're going to find your mileage is going to vary. With a lot of these things, it's going to depend on what your team looks like, what your game looks like, and a bunch of other factors. So this is a list of, actually, we have tried at least every single one of these avenues at least once. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other ways to go about marketing your game that aren't included here. There are some things here that work better than others, and we're going to dive into those. So the must-haves: local events and festivals, website, trailer, and a social media presence. We're going to dive into each one of those individually in just a second. But before we do, just a quick word of warning. So taking your game out to market is going to hurt. And you're probably not too unfamiliar with reviews for games. So these reviews here were all pulled from Steam. Absolutely awful. Literally so boring, it's garbage. Super frustrating. This game is stupid. It's hard to control. Stupid combat system. People say mean things about games. There's a problem though. These reviews, these are not from one of our games. These reviews are from games that are rated overwhelmingly positive on Steam. Every single one of the reviews is actually from games that are rated 97 or above. You may have played some of these games, you might love some of these games, and these are what people will go out on the internet to say about these works of art. So what are they going to say about your game? What do they say about our game?
I've taken dumps better than your game.
Taking dumps better than your game.
That's what they said of us.
Important things about taking your game to market. You're going to need to learn how to face criticism. You're going to need to develop thick skin. because at the end of the day, some of this negative feedback is going to be very, very helpful. Now, that said, other feedback is going to be toxic and worthy of ignoring. I've taken better dumps than your game is not constructive criticism. You're not going to learn how to become a better game developer from that criticism. However, you are going to find things out about your game that you didn't know. You are going to get negative feedback that's going to make you hurt, but then you're going to think about it and you're going to say, you know, I really tried to ignore that, but they're right. That is really something that we got to work on. You're going to learn how to listen. You're going to learn what to listen to and what to ignore. Just keep in mind that Steam reviews are basically YouTube comments. Tread lightly. Just go in with some thick skin. You should be fine. But at the end of the day, feedback is the only way your game's going to improve. It's not going to improve unless you go get feedback. And then also, make sure that if you do get good feedback, or once you start implementing all that negative feedback and the feedback starts to be good, don't let it go to your head. Your game is still garbage. You're still up against games like Red Dead Redemption and the Spider-Man, these top-tier AAA studios. Even if you get out of the indie soup, you're still competing for playtime against some of the greatest developers in the world. So don't let it go to your head. So where do you find that criticism? So the first two that we listed there were local events and festivals. I'm going to refer to them as different types of things. I'm going to get into that right now. So local events are great because they're great for playtesting. When I talk about local events, I mean like small little meetups, little events, not where you're bringing your banners with you and you're bringing your swag with you, but when you're bringing maybe just a laptop and a build, an early development build, just to get some people to play it. Playcrafting is a place in Boston that holds a lot of different places like this. Indie meetups. Boston Indies. They'll do indie nights where you can bring your game and basically take a build, doesn't have to be polished, doesn't have to be finished, just has to be working, and have people play it. Have them play it without you telling them what to do. Get a sense of what it looks like when they play it, get a sense of whether or not they like it. Have them talk about your game while they're playing it so you can get some feedback on it, so you can figure out what really works, what really shines through, and what's just not working. It might surprise you to find out that something that you found to be kind of like throwaway, not very important, might be the most fun element of your game after you have 16 people play it, and that's the only thing that everybody keeps gravitating towards. You know, these are important things for you to learn, and taking it out and seeing it actually played firsthand in front of you is a great way to learn that. Key thing about this, though, is don't implement every suggestion. You're going to run into plenty of people like you, aspiring game devs, who want your game to be their game, and they're going to slowly suggest elements until they get there sometimes. Just be careful about what you do and you don't implement. Once again, learn what to listen to and what to ignore.
Yeah, someone once told us our 2D platformer puzzle game should be more like Super Metroid.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what?
Right. John Q. Average Man wasn't good enough because it wasn't Super Metroid. So like we said, don't implement every suggestion, though it is worth noting that was our first release game. In our latest release game, we are making a Metroid, so do listen to all the advice, just maybe not right now. Festivals and conventions. Why are they different than local events? Some of these festivals can be local. The difference being these are not places for you to go and have people play a potentially broken pre-alpha version to tell you what they think you might improve on. These are places for you to go out and shout to the rooftops about how awesome your game is and how everybody should be playing it. You're bringing a polished demo to these things. Squash all the bugs before you go out there. You still might see some bugs, and that's fine, but you want to make sure that people can play it and have fun, because this is really where you're trying to sell the game. Be able to talk about your game in 30 seconds. Be able to talk about your game in a sentence. But still be able to talk about your game until you're blue in the face. You're going to run into people who want the single sentence pitch. You're going to want the 30-second pitch and everybody in between. Some people, they're not going to want to be talked to at all. You got to let them play the game and watch them play. This is also the point in time where indie studios start to cost a little bit of money. If you want to get the promotion out there, you're going to need the booth swag to go with it. Whether you're handing out things like paper handouts, stuff like that, putting together email lists, or putting up banners and things like that, it does start to have a bit of a cost. The great thing is something like a banner you can buy once and roll out at a bunch of conventions. It does start to pay for itself as the word gets out there and sales eventually start coming in.
Yeah, and another thing about these conventions here is to be intelligent about how you approach it. They do cost money. I'll even tell you, our PAX booth was probably about $2,500 for everything. But we measure the cost per impression for every single person that uses it. So we measure how many people came to the booth. We measure how long each person has played the game, how many pieces of swag that we handed out, and actually breaking down the cost associated with it. If I'm getting $10 per playtest and I'm charging $20 for the game, I'm operating at a loss under that circumstance, right? So just making sure that it is worth your investment. There are certain festivals that you get in for free. BFIG, if you get accepted to BFIG submission, like that was our best cost benefit analysis one because
And that's the
we paid nothing for the booth and we got a bunch of playtests, so that was really great.
And like in right on that topic too, there are a bunch of ways for you to find programs to help subsidize a lot of this cost. PAX Rising is another great example. They will get you onto the floor of PAX, and last year the booth was $1,500 or something like that. This year it's paid for. So like things like that can help. So keep an eye out for programs like that. There are a lot of ways to help subsidize a lot of these costs. Now, something else to keep in mind, other things start to add up pretty quickly when you start factoring in hotel and swag and food and transportation and all these other things. It can start to cost money, but if you're smart about it and you can get the subsidized booth and you come in with a little bit of shoestring, a banner that you bought, that you can still reuse, and you just have your computer and a screen, you can still really get to these things and get your game out there for a low cost. And if the game is good enough, it'll do the talking for you. So that's the sort of these where we're spending a lot of time on the festivals and on the local events, because that was really a transformative time for us at Bomb Shelter Games. When we brought Ballistic was the first game we ever brought to a festival, and now we try to go to as many local events and festivals as possible. When Ballistic was in development and launching, we were bringing early pre-alpha builds of Depths of Sanity out just to have people play it just constantly. And now that's where we do the majority of our playtesting, is at local events, and we do the majority of our promoting at festivals.
I think on average we go to one event a month, to be honest, to show this game.
It's something like that. And it shows in the way that the game's been developed. The strides that we've made in Depths of Sanity have been much faster and much more efficient and much better than any of the strides on any of the previous projects we were working on. So the important thing though is going out and doing all of this promotion, going out and meeting all these people doesn't do you any good if after you leave you just disappear. So it's important that when you're doing these promotion, you have places for people to find you. So the first place is a website, and you need a website. We don't mean a Facebook page or an IndieDB page. You should still have those things, but we do mean an actual website. If you want to be taken seriously as an indie studio, you're going to need a .com. It's crazy cheap these days. Yeah, there are also plenty of there are plenty of tools out there to help you create a professionally convincing website very, very cheaply that you can host also very, very cheaply. Do it. It's going to pay for itself. Include on it any information that somebody might possibly need to know about your game. Overview, features, screenshots, trailers, contact information for you. And as I mentioned earlier, it does help legitimize both your game and your studio when you apply to these conventions, when you apply to these festivals. Having a .com for them to go to rather than just a Facebook page or a Twitter page is important. Touched on this on the website. Trailers. Trailers can be a bit difficult to make. We sort of have the benefit of I went to school for video production. I still work professionally as a video editor. So when it comes to us making trailers, we kind of have a bit of a leg up. But I'm not talking about making professional trailers, professional looking launch trailers though that's important, we'll get to that. It is just important that you have footage of your gameplay that is accessible to the people who might want to play it. When was the last time you bought a game without watching any gameplay footage? I don't think I've ever done that. It is fundamentally important that you allow them to see it in play at some point in time. Screenshots just aren't going to cut it. Early on in early builds of your game, when you're applying to some of these festivals or these local events, it can just be uninterrupted gameplay footage. Later, you might try to use like iMovie or something like that to splice together something of like the good parts of the games. These are all fine just to show some gameplay at the end of the day. And you're going to need these, like I mentioned, to get into these conventions. When it finally comes time to actually launch your game, when you're fully taking it to market, the game's coming out, you're going to want a launch trailer. You're going to want it to pop. And this is another place where you might need to throw some money at it if you don't have that sort of experience level on your team. Or you might try to figure out a way to add it or cultivate it yourself. Creating video is becoming easier by the day, so don't shy away from a really nice launch trailer. And finally, social media is a bit of a giant monster in social media, which is kind of unfortunate. The unfortunate thing about social media is at the end of the day, it's really hard to figure out if any of it means anything. We've gotten retweeted by Xbox, and like, all of these other things that like at the end of the day, it just doesn't mean anything. It makes you feel good, but just like achievement points, it just isn't worth anything. But that isn't to say that social media is unimportant. It is actually fundamentally super important. What we were talking about, building a fan base, building a community, social media is how you're going to do this. You're going to find that what you do, you're going to get out what you put in. If you set up a Facebook page and never touch it, you're not going to get anything out of the Facebook page. That is what our Facebook page looks like. We don't really know how to use it all that well, and it is not something that we do well. Twitter, on the other hand, we have found a lot of success on Twitter. We do a lot of interaction with other accounts on Twitter, accounts that dramatically outclass us in terms of development, but also other young development teams like ours, events like this. Social media is a great way to continue that festival or local event conversation beyond that meet space into, to the cloud, for lack of a better term. Once the interaction is key, but also just putting stuff out there, producing content, whatever it is. If it's screenshots of your game or concept art of your game, that's awesome. But at the same time, if it's just memes, that's fine too. Getting that conversation going, staying a part of the community, letting people know that like, hey, I know that the game's not out yet, but like, we're still here. Just a reminder, at bomb_shelter, by the way. Also, don't feel bad plugging it mercilessly. Put it on your website, put it everywhere. Let people know where to find you. Because if people want to find you, you do not want to deny them that opportunity. Because most people, if they can't find you, they'll just go do something else. The internet is the internet. There's so much to do on there. Don't shy away from things like Twitch and Discord. We don't have any experience in them, but there's just way too much of your demographic, people who play games, on Twitch and Discord to ignore those platforms. Bottom line, build your audience and make yourself available.
Just gonna quick.
Yeah. And the biggest takeaway here too, get out there sooner than you think, even before your game is done. Get out there and, much in the same vein, develop thick skin, because people will tell you that your game isn't done. Be ready to have people talk about your games negatively.
So we'll just script through here, but there's so much more to know. We could talk about pricing, about forming an LLC, different tools you need for your business, talking to lawyers, accountants, what it's like to ship on different consoles. We're happy to talk about any of that. Obviously, we don't have enough time today. But we wanted to leave at least a little bit of time to take some questions, so thank you so much. If you want to get a hold of us, there's our email addresses, or you can hit us up on Twitter as well. So, questions about that? I know it's a lot of information. You're going to go out and form the next indie studio now? And then you're going to remember your dear old friend Owen when you get all that money? No, what do you mean no? Yeah, Monty first.
If you can just hit piracy really quickly, because we got a lot of games in China that we never put in China.
Yeah, so do we. So there's a big thing about piracy. People are going to pirate your game. and that kind of sucks. It just is what it is. There's a lot of techniques to. Let me say this: when you release a game on Steam, people are going to ask you every single day. Every single day, I'll still get emails asking me for codes for my games. Right? Don't give them. Just don't. Like, unless you can verify it, like you can go and see that they are the exact person they're talking about. Don't give away keys ever. Do not ever give away a DRM free copy. Like, that's pirated immediately, right? We all can rail against DRM, but at the end of the day, if I put my game up on Humble, somebody downloads it and they have the EXE, that's it, game over, they've got it. So we use a really cool service to combat that problem. What was that? Keymailer is a service we use where they have to be verified to request a key, and you can go to their channel, see how many subscribers they have, and it will tell you actually on the site how many subscribers they have, and if it's worth giving away. I mean, you're literally losing $17 or however much your game costs every time you give one of those away. So don't think of it, oh, they're free. They're not free. It's a sunk cost. Like, you're losing that potential sale, like the opportunity cost, right?
It's really about trying to make sure you're kind of taking some preventative measures. At the end of the day, there's no way you're going to make sure that nobody is able to pirate your game. There are AAA studios and publishers that have trouble suppressing piracy on their games. You do not have the resources to do that. It is about just being smart about it when you launch.
Yeah, any game's tough because unless you have always online functionality or you have to ping the network to like check if it's an authenticated copy, like it's really hard to instill those copyright protection stuff on such a small game. But you can go up there today on g2a.com and find ballistic keys for sale, and it sucks, but it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
Other question? Yeah, of course.
So when you guys were talking about like keeping track of what happens in festivals,
Yeah.
with like I guess like the analytics of it.
Yeah.
How do you guys go about keeping track of it, and what do you guys keep track of?
So we keep track of a lot of different things. From a technical standpoint, we use Unity Analytics for a lot of stuff. We even just do simple player pref stuff that'll save, and we just check the log at the end. We'll check the play time for each thing, and we'll average out how long each person has played. But when you do that, you have to keep vigilant. It's like, does someone put down the controller and walk away for 20 minutes? That skews it. We check how many people got to certain checkpoints. So if we see that everybody is quitting at checkpoint 2, then we know that something between checkpoint 2 and 3 is causing a problem. We'll check how many people beat the game. I think that's the most of it.
Yeah, and a lot of those specific like analytics out of the sort of convention space, they help you refine a demo for market. You might find interesting things out about like, oh, we found out that we had a batch of enemies that was like super, super difficult, that we didn't realize how hard these enemies were until we saw that almost nobody was making it to checkpoint 3, and we knew that before checkpoint 3, after checkpoint 2, we had a swordfish, a squid, and a bunch of piranhas that were taking everybody out. We didn't know how hard those enemies were, and now we don't actually include any of those enemies in a demo, like I said, making the demo better, but at the same time, we've also thought to move some of those enemies down the level chain a little bit in the actual game itself. So it will be, your mileage is going to vary on those analytics depending on what you're trying to measure. You also, whether or not you can incorporate it into the actual game engine itself might not be something that you're ready for or might be set up to do. Keeping track of just a notepad and keeping track of what you're observing, keeping track of what people are telling you is also very, very important when you're out at those conventions.
And we don't have them in our game, but if there was a key choice that players get to make, I would absolutely measure that. Of like, which character do they choose? They go left or they go right? That's not something that really happens in our demo, but that is a really great example. Is Telltale Games would measure every single response, is like who's chosen what option in Walking Dead and that sort of thing, and alter their decisions based on that. So it's really important to measure that data if you can, if your game has it. Other questions? 1 minute left. Yeah, that's right.
Do you have any experience with, say, working with contractors and paying them with royalty based?
Yeah.
And if so, how did that work for you?
So we have paid with royalties, and it was okay. We did that when we were very starting out. I would never do that now. Like now that we have an established, we have money, and we're all working professionals. You'll notice that we both have full-time jobs, obviously. So I'm much more comfortable paying somebody just $500 out of my personal bank account than I am saying, you'll get 5% of the profits, right? Because let's just say Adeptus said it does really well, and they wrote for me 3 songs. are they entitled to 20 grand? Like, that's ridiculous. And that's tempting to do in the beginning when you have no money. And I guess if you understand the potential of your game, I was happy to give away 5% of John Q. Average Man because that game didn't make anything.
Right.
And you can have 20% for all I care, right? Because I think I just handed the guy like $20 every now and then when I saw him. I didn't even keep track. But yeah, I'd be very cautious about that. And I would get anything of that in writing and looked at by a lawyer before you do it. Because they can contest that and say, hey, especially since you have to report. If you're not a company and you violate that contract, like they're coming for you. They're coming for your assets, especially if it's in writing. So that's why we formed our LLC, to sort of help protect us and avoid any of that icky stuff. But, cool. We are out of time, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
We're obviously available if you want to talk to us afterwards. And enjoy the rest of the buffet, right?